Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors at work in the Charles Manson case. Other questions here include, was he a charismatic leader? And was he actually special? So Charles Manson was a convicted murderer who directed members of his cult to commit murders in 1969. He's often portrayed as an incredible leader who could control people's minds and the mastermind of all the murders committed by the Manson family members. Now, the people I talk about in this video, of course, are real people. So just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. Now, typically, I cover the crimes, then the investigation, the background, and the mental health and personality factors. With Manson, his criminal history started when he was young, so I'm going to start with the background, then just move through the events chronologically, because the background really gets woven together with the criminal history. Then I'll move to the mental health and personality factors. So starting with the background, November 12, 1934, Charles Manson is born in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a 16-year-old mother named Kathleen Maddox. She was a prostitute and was addicted to alcohol. He was born Charles Maddox. His father was named Colonel Scott. Not a real colonel, that was just his name. He was actually a con artist. Later, we see Manson's mother married a man named William Manson, so this is where Charles Manson gets his name. The couple divorced about 3 years later. In 1939, Maddox was arrested for robbery, and she was in prison until 1942. After she was released, she was arrested for grand larceny, but never convicted, and she remarried in 1943. So we see kind of on both sides, genetically, that Manson runs into problems, right? We see criminal behavior with both the father and the mother. Also, of course, we see a poor role model in Manson's mother. So now moving to the criminal history and the background continued. Charles Manson got into trouble early. We see theft, truancy, setting a fire, and other crimes. When he was 13, he was sent to a school in Indiana for juvenile delinquents. He ran away, his mother returned him to the school, and he ran away again. In 1948, Manson robbed a grocery store, and he lived on that money and other proceeds of thefts for a while. He was arrested, sent to a facility in Nebraska. He teamed up with another student named Nielsen. They stole a car, robbed a store, and then went out to Illinois where they committed thefts for Nielsen's uncle. We see after this that Manson was arrested, he was sent to Indiana, he ran away from that school 18 different times, eventually escaping in early 1951 with 2 accomplices. They stole cars and tried to make it to California. They robbed and burglarized 15 to 20 gas stations along the way. They were arrested in Utah. We see Manson at this point is sent to Washington, D.C. He's assessed at that time. His IQ was reported at 109, so fairly intelligent, but he could not read, and he was described as slick and extremely sensitive. He continues to commit crimes while in custody, including an assault of a sexual nature against a male inmate. He was transferred to a maximum security reform school and was released in 1954. In 1955, Manson got married. Manson gets arrested for stealing a car at this point. He was sentenced to 5 years probation. His probation was revoked after he failed to appear to answer for another charge. He was sentenced to 3 years in a California prison. In 1956, while in prison, his wife gave birth to a son, Charles Manson Jr. He would end his own life in 1993. Just before a parole hearing, Manson attempts to steal a car. He gets another 5 years probation, and his parole was denied, right? So usually, if you try to escape from prison, if you were up for parole, that'll be denied at that time, right? So he shouldn't have been surprised by that. In 1958, we see his wife divorced him. Manson goes back to prison for trying to cash a forged check. He gets a 10-year sentence that was suspended, and he gets probation. He gets married again in 1959. Soon after this, he violates probation, and he was ordered to serve the 10-year sentence that had been suspended. In 1963, allegedly he fathers a second son, Charles Luther Manson. It's also believed that Manson may have had other children, but we don't have a lot of information about this. After this, we see that Manson gets divorced again. In 1964, Manson learns to play the guitar and becomes obsessed with the Beatles. In 1967, he is released from prison again. In 1968, we see that Manson forms a cult at the Spawn Ranch in Southern California, mostly comprising young women. It was known as the Family. It would later become known as the Manson family. Now moving to March 23, 1969, Charles Manson visits 10050 Celio Drive, the residence of the actress Sharon Tate. Now this house would be demolished in 1994. He was looking for Terry Melcher, who he had hoped would publish some of his music. He runs into Sharon Tate's photographer, who tells him to leave by the back alley. It was suspected that perhaps Manson remembered this insult, and this would serve as a motivation for his later crimes. A few months later, Manson informs the members of the Family that he believed that there was an impending race war. He referred to this war as Helter Skelter. August 8, 1969, Manson sends 4 of his followers to start Helter Skelter and tells them to get knives and a change of clothes. Shortly after midnight, now on August 9, the 4 family members drive to Sharon Tate's residence. 3 of them murder Tate and 4 of her friends, while one of them, Linda Kasabian, acts as a lookout and doesn't physically enter the home. Moving now to August 10, 1969, early in the morning, Manson, the 4 family members who committed the murders the day before, and 2 additional members travel to the house of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Now, there are different accounts of what Manson did there, what his level of involvement was, but we know that Manson family members did kill these 2 people, and once again, Linda Kasabian did not enter the house. 2 months later, Manson and several other members of the family were arrested for car theft. Over the next several months, several people implicate Manson in the murders, but the most damaging witness was Susan Atkins. She was one of the accomplices that committed the murder on August 9, 1969. Eventually, a judge grants Linda Kasabian immunity from prosecution in the Tate-LaBianca murders in exchange for her testimony against Manson. January 1971, Manson and 3 accomplices are found guilty, and in March, all 4 were sentenced to death. Manson was later convicted of 2 separate murders that he directed in 1969. In 1972, a change in the law results in the sentences of Manson and his accomplices being commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Manson remained in prison and was denied parole 12 times before dying in 2017. He was 83 years old. Now moving to the mental health and personality factors. So the problem with trying to understand Manson is that the narrative that's been portrayed, with him being the leader of the Manson family, may not be entirely reliable. Some of those accounts are based on just one witness, and there are conflicting accounts. In addition, there were some really shady dealings on the part of the prosecution to get Manson convicted, like taking away Susan Atkins' public defender and assigning a friendly former prosecutor as her new public defender. Rather than buying into all these theories about what Manson may or may not have said or thought leading up to the murders, I will base this analysis on what I've seen in Manson's history, his testimony, and the videos we see of Manson. He was interviewed several times in prison. So first I'll look at the personality pathology, then look at potential psychosis. Now in terms of his personality profile, I conceptualize personality using the 5-factor model. I remember the 5 factors through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, with Manson's profile, we see low openness to experience, extremely low conscientiousness, low extroversion, extremely low agreeableness, and low neuroticism. Now, his behavior seems to clearly align with antisocial personality disorder. We see that there are 7 symptom criteria for this disorder, and it can be argued that his behavior aligns with all 7. We see repeated unlawful behaviors. That seems pretty clear. Consistent deceitfulness. Interestingly, I think that his behavior aligns with this criterion, but it's not clear how often he's actually lying. We see impulsivity, aggressiveness, a reckless disregard for safety, irresponsibility, and lack of remorse. So an argument can be made that he has 7 out of 7 or 6 out of 7. Furthermore, he seems to endorse all of the characteristics of factor 2 psychopathy. For example, sensation seeking, juvenile delinquency, revocation of conditional release, irresponsibility, and criminal versatility. But what about psychosis? So we covered personality pathology, but was Manson psychotic? Well, listening to Manson talk in these interviews, he seems disorganized, tangential, scattered. His narrative doesn't always make sense. He goes from smiling to frowning and back very quickly. It's really an odd presentation. He does seem to listen to and understand questions, but he often does not directly answer the questions, and sometimes he doesn't answer at all, rather, again, just going off on a tangent. Now, he's made a number of non-specific and specific threats while he was in prison. He says he was an outlaw. He says he has no remorse. And we see grandiose statements, like he said maybe he should have killed more people, or that if he started murdering, there would be nobody left. So he's so dangerous he could wipe out everybody. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and others believe he had delusional disorder. But either way, psychosis seems to be present. There seems to be little doubt that Manson was a dangerous individual. It's not really that surprising that after his release from prison in 1967, he returns there in 1969 to remain there for the rest of his life. But was he really a master manipulator? Was he really the ringleader of this cult that he formed? The interesting thing about Manson is I don't really see compelling evidence that he was some type of leader. He doesn't actually seem that special. He has pronounced criminal tendencies, which is unusual, but certainly not unheard of. It makes me wonder, what if Manson was really just another person being reckless and using substances at Spawn Ranch? Again, a dangerous criminal, but it doesn't seem clear that he was their leader. He may have been intelligent, but he really couldn't apply his intelligence well. He wasn't charismatic. He was not organized. He may have just been the person who called the people around him the family, and a person with dangerous ideas. But maybe his accomplices wanted to believe that he was the mastermind. Maybe they were looking for guidance. Maybe they were looking for someone to encourage their bad behavior or excuse their bad behavior. The idea here was that Manson formed this cult and convinced people to join. But what if he simply formed it and people decided to join? What if he attracted people who were like-minded, who had a lot of excitement seeking, who heavily used substances, including hallucinogens, who were willing to commit crimes, who were vulnerable to unhealthy input, so who were suggestible? The bottom line here is that I don't think he used some type of mind control to mesmerize a bunch of young people into becoming murderers. In reality, each individual person who committed the crimes was likely responsible for their own actions. I think these criminals made him into something that he was not, elevated him to a position of leadership, not so much because they needed someone to blame, but because they needed him to be the leader. They were starving for a confident leader with a definitive message. And even though Manson's message was destructive, he believed in his own message. And that level of confidence is appealing to people who do not have critical thinking skills. They are impressed by somebody like Manson, who is wrong, but who is absolutely sure that he is right. They interpreted his delusions as inspiring, his break from reality as liberating, and his impulsive violence as revolutionary. Of course, another theory here could be that this was a case of folie à deux, shared psychotic disorder, which is now just known as a particular manifestation of delusional disorder. So under this theory, Manson was psychotic, and his accomplices adopted that psychosis. Either way, though, I really don't think Manson was special. He was just an extremely confident and prolific criminal. Now, I know whenever I talk about high-profile cases like the Charles Manson case, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.